I'm Margaret, 67 years old and recently betrayed by my own flesh and blood. After my husband Robert died 5 years ago, I never expected to feel homeless again. When arthritis made daily tasks difficult, my daughter Barbara invited me to move in temporarily. 3 months later, her husband Edmund decided I was just another mouth to feed, and showed me the door. Little did they know, my decades as a financial advisor had taught me patience and strategy. Let me tell you what happened next. Before I continue, where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button and join me for a story about family betrayal and the sweetest revenge served financially cold. My life before all this drama was comfortable but modest. I'd worked hard as a financial advisor for over 30 years, helping others secure their futures while carefully building my own nest egg. Nothing extravagant. Just enough for a peaceful retirement in my small 3-bedroom ranch house in Maplewood. The garden out back was my pride and joy, especially the rose bushes Robert and I had planted when we first moved in. Robert, my rock for 40 wonderful years. He passed suddenly from a heart attack 5 years ago, just 2 years into our retirement. We had so many plans, traveling across the country in an RV, visiting all the national parks, spending winters in Arizona. His death left a hole in my heart that never truly healed. He'd always been supportive of my career, proudly telling everyone his wife helped people make smart money decisions when most women of our generation were expected to stay home. After he died, my relationship with my daughter Barbara became even more important. She was our only child, born when we were both 30. A surprise blessing after years of trying. I'd always been close with her, from her pigtail days through her rebellious teens and into adulthood. Barbara was smart, got her marketing degree, and worked her way up at a big advertising firm. When Robert was alive, we'd have Sunday dinners every week. After he passed, Barbara would still visit at least twice a month, sometimes bringing groceries even though I insisted I didn't need the help. She'd sit at my kitchen table, sharing office gossip and relationship updates while I baked her favorite lemon squares. I was there for all the important moments in her life: college graduation, first heartbreak, first promotion. I helped her financially through college, wanting her to graduate debt-free. Unlike some parents, I never expected repayment. Seeing her succeed was all the return I needed. 3 years ago, Barbara married Edmund. I had my reservations from the start. He worked in middle management at some technology company, always talking about his next big promotion that never seemed to materialize. There was something controlling about him. The way he'd check Barbara's phone, how he always needed to know where she was. Still, Barbara seemed happy, and that's what mattered to me. They lived in a nice apartment building in the trendy part of town, nothing fancy, but in a good neighborhood with rising property values. Barbara would sometimes complain about the rent increases each year, but that's city living for you. My trouble started 6 months ago. My arthritis, usually manageable, flared up badly in both hands and my right knee. Simple tasks became painful challenges. Opening jars, gardening, even climbing the stairs to my bedroom. I never complained to Barbara, but she noticed during one of her visits when I winced trying to pour coffee. A week later, she called with what seemed like a wonderful suggestion. "Mom, Edmund and I have been talking. Why don't you come stay with us until you're back on your feet? The guest room is just sitting empty, and we could help with anything you need." I hesitated. I valued my independence and wasn't sure about living with a son-in-law I only tolerated for my daughter's sake. "That's sweet, honey, but I'm fine. The doctor says this flare-up should pass in a few weeks." "Mom, please. I worry about you alone in that house. What if you fall? What if you need something in the middle of the night? It would make me feel better knowing you're safe." Her concern seemed so genuine that I eventually agreed. We decided I would sell my house. The maintenance had been becoming too much anyway, and stay with them until finding a suitable senior-friendly apartment. I put most of my furniture and belongings in storage, bringing only essential clothes, personal items, and important documents. My life savings were secure in various accounts, giving me financial independence despite my temporary physical limitations. The day Barbara helped me move in, I felt optimistic. Edmund seemed welcoming enough, helping carry my 2 suitcases to the guest room, showing me where everything was in the kitchen. Barbara had placed fresh flowers on the nightstand, daisies my favorite. "Welcome to your temporary home, Mom. Barbara said, hugging me. "We'll take good care of you." If only I'd known how quickly that promise would be broken. The first week at Barbara and Edmund's apartment was pleasant enough. Barbara took a few days off work to help me settle in, and Edmund maintained a polite, if somewhat distant, demeanor. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a window overlooking a small park. I did my best to keep my belongings organized and contained, not wanting to intrude on their space more than necessary. By the second week, however, subtle changes began creeping in. Edmund's welcoming smile appeared less frequently. He'd sigh audibly when I'd turn on the television in the living room, even though I kept the volume low. The bathroom schedule became a point of contention. Apparently, my morning routine was making him run late, though I was always finished by 6:30 a.m. "Mom, would you mind using the bathroom after Edmund leaves for work?" Barbara asked one morning, her expression apologetic. "He's really particular about his morning schedule." "Of course, dear," I agreed, swallowing my frustration. It was their home after all. Meals became another source of tension. I offered to cook dinner several times a week, hoping to contribute to the household. My lemon chicken had always been Barbara's favorite, and I made it my first night on cooking duty. "It's a bit dry," Edmund commented, barely touching his portion, "and rather bland. I prefer more seasoning." I noticed him whispering to Barbara later that evening, his eyes occasionally darting my way. Barbara's face would tighten, and she'd shake her head slightly before directing a strained smile at me. The pattern continued. I'd overhear snippets of hushed arguments, "Your mother's constant presence," and "didn't think it would be this long." That would abruptly cease when I entered the room. Barbara, once so chatty and open with me, began spending more time in their bedroom with the door closed or making excuses about work deadlines. To ease the tension, I started finding reasons to be out of the apartment. I took long walks around the neighborhood, discovering little shops and cafes I'd never noticed when just visiting. The local library became my sanctuary, quiet, welcoming, and blessedly free of Edmund's sighs and critical comments. One Tuesday morning, I discovered the senior community center 3 blocks from their apartment. The center offered card games, art classes, and most importantly, company. That's where I met Diane, a 73-year-old retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor and wisdom earned through similar experiences. "Moved in with your daughter, huh?" she said after I explained my situation. "Let me guess. It's not going quite as harmoniously as expected?" "They're just adjusting to having me there," I defended. "Barbara's always been wonderful to me." Diane gave me a knowing look. "Honey, I lived with my son and his wife for 8 months. Started great, ended with me renting my own place and them not speaking to me for a year. Living with adult children is complicated, especially when there's a spouse in the mix." I dismissed her warnings. My relationship with Barbara was different. We'd always been close, practically best friends. This was just a temporary rough patch. When I returned to the apartment that evening, Barbara was alone, Edmund working late. She seemed more like her old self, helping me prepare a simple pasta dinner. "I'm sorry things have been a bit tense," she said, chopping tomatoes. "Edmund's under a lot of stress at work, and he's not used to sharing space. He grew up as an only child in a big house." "I understand," I replied, though part of me wanted to point out that I was hardly an unruly teenager playing loud music. Maybe I should start looking for my own place sooner rather than later. "No, Mom, please don't think that way," Barbara insisted, touching my arm. "It's just an adjustment period. We want you here." I chose to believe her, ignoring the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Diane's. The true nature of our arrangement became clearer at a family dinner 2 months into my stay. Edmund had insisted on cooking a rare occurrence, and had prepared an admittedly delicious roast. He'd also opened an expensive bottle of wine, creating an atmosphere of celebration that seemed oddly forced. "So, Margaret," he said, using my first name as he always did, never Mom or even Mrs. Wilson. "How's the arthritis these days? Seems like you're getting around much better." His tone was casual, but his eyes were calculating, watching me grip my wine glass with ease, something that would have been impossible 2 months prior. "Much better, thank you," I replied cautiously. "The medication is working wonders." "That's excellent news," he said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Barbara. Really excellent. The conversation moved on, but the message was clear. My improved health was being noted, catalogued, and evaluated against my welcome. Later that night, I called Diane from the privacy of my room. The vultures are circling, I whispered, only half joking. Start making plans, she advised firmly. Better to leave on your own terms than theirs. If only I'd followed her advice sooner. As my third month under Barbara and Edmund's roof began, the thin veneer of hospitality continued to crack. Edmund no longer bothered hiding his impatience with my presence, and his complaints became increasingly direct. The water bill was $30 higher this month, he announced one evening, dropping the statement into an otherwise pleasant dinner conversation. And the electric is up too. I'm sorry to hear that, I responded, feeling my cheeks flush. I'd be happy to contribute to the utilities. That's not necessary, Edmund replied stiffly. We're managing. Just something to be mindful of. Barbara shifted uncomfortably beside him but said nothing. This had become her standard response. A weak defense of me followed by silent acquiescence to Edmund's passive-aggressive behavior. Later that week, I tried again to contribute financially, offering Barbara some money for groceries. Mom, please, she whispered, glancing toward their bedroom where Edmund was changing after work. Edmund's very proud. He doesn't want to feel like he can't provide for his household. But I'm eating the food too, I reasoned. It's only fair. It would just make things more complicated, she insisted, returning my offered cash. Trust me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My money wasn't welcome, but my absence increasingly was. My arthritis had improved significantly, the flare-up having subsided with proper medication and gentle exercise. The original reason for my temporary stay was resolving, yet Barbara no longer mentioned my moving out. It was as if acknowledging my improved health would necessitate addressing my future living arrangements, a conversation she seemed determined to avoid. A new complication arose when Edmund came home one evening looking dejected. After a hushed conversation with Barbara in their bedroom, they emerged with the news. Edmund's company is restructuring, Barbara explained, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. They're cutting salaries by 15% to avoid layoffs. I'm so sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Financial stress could strain even the strongest relationships. We'll be fine, Edmund said sharply. We just need to tighten our belts for a while. The salary cut cast a longer shadow over the apartment than seemed proportionate to the actual financial impact. Edmund began leaving bank statements and bills conspicuously visible on the kitchen counter, always open to show balances or due amounts. It felt deliberately performative, like exhibits in a case he was building. One afternoon, while dusting the living room, my attempt to contribute in non-financial ways, I accidentally knocked over a crystal vase, a wedding gift from Edmund's parents. It shattered on the hardwood floor, tiny fragments scattering across the room. When Edmund returned home and saw the broken vase, his reaction was disproportionate to the accident. Do you have any idea how much that was worth? He demanded, face flushing with anger. It was Waterford crystal. Irreplaceable. I'm so sorry, Edmund. I apologized, genuinely remorseful. It was an accident. I'd be happy to replace it. With what money? He snapped, then immediately looked embarrassed by his own outburst. Barbara stepped between us. It was just a vase, Edmund. Mom didn't mean to break it. The incident hung in the air for days afterward, referenced in subtle digs and pointed sighs whenever I handled anything breakable. Then came the announcement that changed everything. During a rare peaceful dinner, Barbara placed her fork down and reached for Edmund's hand. Mom, she said, a smile blooming across her face. We have some news. I'm pregnant. Joy surged through me. A grandchild. Despite all the tension, this was wonderful news. I hugged Barbara tightly, tears welling in my eyes. Congratulations. Oh honey, I'm so happy for you both. Edmund accepted my congratulations with what seemed like genuine warmth, the first I'd seen from him in weeks. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like perhaps this baby would bring us closer together as a family. That illusion shattered later that same evening. From my room, I overheard Edmund and Barbara talking in the kitchen, their voices carrying through the apartment's thin walls. We need to start thinking about the nursery, Edmund was saying. That room is the only option. But where will Mom go? Barbara asked, her voice lower but still audible. Barbara, we always said this was temporary. Your mother's arthritis is better now. With the baby coming, we need to face reality. There's not enough space for all of us. Their voices dropped lower after that, but the message was unmistakably clear. My presence was becoming incompatible with their future plans. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, sleep elusive as I processed what I'd overheard. The next morning, I called Diane from a coffee shop down the street. If things get bad, she offered immediately, I have a spare room. It's small, but it's yours if you need it. Thank you, I said, emotion thick in my throat. I hope it won't come to that. But Edmund seemed determined to make sure it would. Over the next 2 weeks, financial paperwork appeared with increasing frequency. Mortgage statements, credit card bills, baby furniture catalogs with prices circled. He began talking about financial planning for 3 in my presence, deliberately excluding me from the family unit. I made one final attempt to ease the situation, approaching Barbara when Edmund was at work. Honey, I've been thinking about contributing to the rent while I'm here. Especially with the baby coming, I want to help. Barbara looked tempted but shook her head. Edmund would see it as charity. His pride. You know how men can be. I wanted to point out that pride wouldn't pay for diapers or formula, but I bit my tongue. The writing was on the wall, spelled out in Edmund's increasingly transparent hints and Barbara's averted eyes. The final confrontation arrived on a Tuesday evening, orchestrated by Edmund like a business meeting. He asked me to join them at the dining table after dinner, his expression solemn as if preparing to deliver bad news to an underperforming employee. I knew before he spoke what was coming. I just never imagined how cruelly he would phrase it. Edmund sat at the head of the dining table, hands folded in front of him like a corporate executive about to announce layoffs. Barbara sat beside him, eyes downcast, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. I took the chair across from her, my back straight, years of professional poise serving me well in this moment I'd been dreading. Margaret, Edmund began, his tone formal and rehearsed. Barbara and I have given this a great deal of thought. As you know, our financial situation has become more constrained recently. With the baby coming, we've had to take a hard look at our expenses and make some difficult decisions. I nodded silently, determined not to make this easier for him. The reality is, he continued, clearing his throat, we need to start preparing for the baby. The guest room will need to be converted into a nursery, and frankly, our budget is stretched to the breaking point. He paused, then delivered the killing blow. We simply can't afford another mouth to feed. Another mouth to feed. The phrase hung in the air between us, ugly and dehumanizing. In 6 words, he had reduced me from beloved mother and grandmother-to-be to a financial burden, a drain on resources, an unwanted pet. Barbara finally looked up, her expression a mixture of shame and appeasement. Mom, we care about you. But with the baby coming and Edmund's salary reduction. What your daughter is trying to say, Edmund interrupted, is that we need you to find other arrangements. We think 2 weeks is a generous timeline to figure something out. 2 weeks. After decades of supporting Barbara emotionally and financially, after opening my home to her countless times, after selling my house based on what I thought was a genuine offer of help, I was being given 14 days to vacate. Like a delinquent tenant. I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing but unable to form words. The betrayal wasn't just in the eviction. It was in Barbara's silent complicity, her unwillingness to stand up for me against her husband's cruelty. I understand. I finally managed, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. Thank you for your generosity. I excused myself and retreated to the guest room, soon to be nursery, where I spent the night staring at the ceiling, tears silently tracking down my temples into my hair. I cycled through shock, grief, anger, and finally, as dawn broke, a cold, clear resolution. The next morning, Edmund left early for work. Barbara knocked tentatively on my door, her eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be her own sleepless night. Mom, I'm so sorry about how that happened, she said, voice breaking. I wanted to tell you differently. But you still wanted to tell me, I replied, keeping my tone even. Edmund says we can't afford the baby and you, she admitted, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm caught in the middle here. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity that Barbara would always choose Edmund over me. The daughter I'd raised, supported, and loved unconditionally had become a woman who would put her husband's demands above her mother's well-being. The revelation hurt worse than any physical pain my arthritis had ever caused. There is no middle, Barbara, I said quietly. There's only the choice you've made. I called Diane immediately after Barbara left for work, not bothering to hide the tremor in my voice. They're kicking me out, I said when she answered. Edmund says they can't afford another mouth to feed, with the baby coming. Diane's colorful response would have made a sailor blush. My spare room is yours, she said firmly. For as long as you need it. I spent that day packing my belongings, methodically folding clothes and organizing personal items, while a lifetime of maternal love and sacrifice played through my mind like a slideshow. By the time Barbara returned from work, most of my possessions were neatly packed in the 2 suitcases I'd arrived with. Mom, she called, confusion evident in her voice as she saw the packed bags. You don't have to leave immediately. We said 2 weeks. I know when I'm not wanted, Barbara, I replied, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. I'll be staying with a friend until I figure out my next steps. A friend? Who? Her surprise that I had somewhere to go was another small hurt to add to the growing collection. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you've made your choice. I hope it brings you happiness. I left that evening, a rideshare taking me and my 2 suitcases to Diane's modest apartment 10 miles away. As we drove away from Barbara and Edmund's building, I felt something break inside me. The final thread of illusion that family loyalty would always triumph over convenience and financial considerations. Diane welcomed me with open arms, a glass of wine, and no judgment. Her spare room was indeed small, barely fitting a twin bed and dresser, but it was offered with genuine care. Something I hadn't felt in Barbara and Edmund's spacious apartment for months. The first week at Diane's was a blur of grief and betrayal. I cried more than I had since Robert's death, mourning not a person this time but the relationship I thought I had with my daughter. Diane gave me space when I needed it and company when the silence grew too loud with my thoughts. By the second week, the tears began to dry up, replaced by something harder and more determined. Lying awake at night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, a thought crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. I've spent my life being underestimated, first as a woman in finance, now as an aging mother. It's time to remind them who I really am. That thought was the turning point, the moment grief transformed into purpose. As a financial advisor, I'd helped countless clients navigate complex situations, build wealth, and secure their futures. Now it was time to apply those skills to my own life, with an additional objective beyond security. It was time for Margaret Wilson to remind the world she was nobody's extra mouth to feed. I woke up the next morning in Diane's spare room with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but now channeled into something productive, even if that productivity was fueled partly by righteous indignation. Over coffee, I shared my thoughts with Diane. I've been thinking about what happened, about Barbara and Edmund, about being treated like a burden. Natural to be upset, Diane said, stirring her coffee. I'd be furious. I'm beyond upset, I replied. I'm motivated. For 32 years, I helped people make smart financial decisions. I guided clients through real estate investments, retirement planning, market downturns. Those skills didn't disappear when I retired. Diane raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you thinking, Margaret? I'm thinking it's time to put my expertise to work for myself. That morning, I pulled out my laptop and began researching the rental market in Barbara and Edmund's neighborhood. Property values had been steadily rising there for years, gentrification pushing prices up as young professionals moved in. Their building was in a particularly desirable location, walking distance to restaurants, shops, and public transportation. What I discovered next made me sit up straight. Their apartment building, a modest 3-story structure with 12 units, was significantly undervalued compared to similar properties in the area. The building had been owned by the same family for decades, maintained adequately but never fully modernized. I called Thomas, a former colleague who had transitioned from financial advising to real estate investment after retirement. We'd kept in loose contact over the years, occasionally meeting for lunch to discuss the market and reminisce about our advisory days. "Thomas," I said when he answered, "I need your expertise on something. Are you free for lunch today?" Over sandwiches at a quiet cafe, I explained my situation, the move-in with Barbara, Edmund's hostility, and finally the cruel dismissal. Thomas listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly indignant. "That's appalling, Margaret. Truly shameful behavior," he said when I finished. "It is what it is," I replied, having cried all the tears I intended to over the matter. "But now I'm interested in making an investment, and I could use your guidance." Thomas leaned forward. "What kind of investment?" "A building. Specifically, the building Barbara and Edmund live in." His eyes widened, then a slow smile spread across his face. Well, Margaret Wilson plays hardball. "I'm simply considering a sound financial investment," I said, unable to keep a small smile from my own lips. "The fact that my daughter and son-in-law happen to be tenants is merely coincidental." Thomas chuckled. "Of course. Purely coincidental." He grew more serious. "Do you know if it's even for sale? That's where I need your help. Your connections in real estate are better than mine." He pulled out his phone and made a few calls, stepping outside for the last one. When he returned, his expression told me everything before he spoke. "You won't believe this, Margaret. The owner is actually preparing to list it next month. Old fellow looking to retire to Florida. His grandson manages the property and says his grandfather would consider a private sale to avoid the hassle of listing." It felt like fate. Or perhaps karma was working in my favor. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas helped me navigate the process. We created a limited liability company, Sunrise Properties LLC, to keep my identity hidden from both the seller and the tenants. I used my life savings as a down payment and secured financing for the remainder through Thomas's banking connections, my excellent credit score making approval straightforward despite my retired status. The negotiations with the building's owner were surprisingly smooth. He was indeed eager to sell quickly and appreciated dealing with a serious buyer who wasn't demanding extensive inspections or repairs. We settled on a price that was fair to him, yet still left room for a solid return on my investment, given the neighborhood's trajectory. The waiting period for closing was excruciating. Every day I expected Barbara to call, perhaps with an apology or at least an inquiry about my well-being. The phone remained silent. I checked my email compulsively, but nothing appeared there either. Their silence only strengthened my resolve. Exactly 3 months after being told I was another mouth to feed, I signed the final paperwork making me the official owner of a 12-unit apartment building, including Unit 3B, currently occupied by Barbara and Edmund Wilson. I hadn't even told Diane the specific details of my plan, simply that I was making an investment with my savings. After the closing, I invited her to lunch at an upscale restaurant to celebrate. "I bought a building," I announced after we'd ordered. "A building?" Diane repeated, eyes widening. "Like an entire building?" "A 12-unit apartment building in Westbrook Heights." Diane's fork clattered against her plate. "That's where Barbara and Edmund live." I nodded, taking a sip of my wine. "Margaret Wilson," Diane said slowly. "Did you buy your daughter's apartment building?" "I did." "Does she know?" "Not yet." Diane threw her head back and laughed, drawing glances from nearby tables. "That's the most magnificently petty thing I've ever heard." I am in awe. The next step was finding a property management company to handle day-to-day operations. I wanted to remain anonymous to the tenants, at least initially. Through Thomas's recommendation, I hired Westside Property Management, a reputable local company with experience managing similar buildings. My primary contact was Jessica, a sharp-minded property manager in her 40s who clearly knew her business. We met in her office to review the existing tenant leases and discuss plans for the building. "Most of the leases are standard," Jessica explained, flipping through the file. "Month to month for the longer-term tenants, 1-year terms for the newer ones." She pulled out one particular lease. "This one for 3B is coming up for renewal next month. Barbara and Edmund Wilson. Any special instructions for them?" I kept my expression neutral. What's the current rent for that unit? Jessica named a figure that was indeed quite reasonable for the neighborhood. Another sign of the previous owner's outdated approach to property management. And what would be a market rate increase? I asked. Typically, we'd raise it 5 to 8% upon renewal. Given the neighborhood trends, we could justify 10% without much pushback. I nodded thoughtfully. I see. And what's the maximum legal increase we could implement? Jessica looked surprised. Well, there's no rent control in this district, so technically there's no legal maximum. But anything over 15% would likely result in tenants moving out. Is there a particular unit you're concerned about? I'm just exploring all aspects of my investment, I replied smoothly. For Unit 3B specifically, I'd like to prepare a special letter to accompany their renewal notice. I'll email you the text. Jessica nodded, making a note in her file. If she thought the request unusual, she didn't comment. That evening, I sat at Diane's small kitchen table drafting and redrafting the letter that would accompany Barbara and Edmund's rent increase notice. It needed to be perfect, not legally actionable as harassment, but clear enough to convey exactly who was now in control of their housing situation. After 7 attempts, I had it professional in tone, devastating in content. I also made a decision about exactly how much to increase their rent. Triple would make my point while still being technically affordable on Edmund's salary if they cut other expenses, which seemed only fair, given how concerned he'd been about the cost of feeding his mother-in-law. I emailed the letter to Jessica along with instructions for all tenant notifications. For the other 11 units, I authorized standard increases of 7%. For Unit 3B only, I specified a 300% increase, along with my special letter to be delivered in a separate envelope marked personal and confidential. The pieces were in place. Now all I had to do was wait for delivery day. And imagine the look on Edmund's face when he realized exactly who he'd dismissed as a worthless burden. Jessica and her team delivered the rent increase notices on the first Tuesday of the month. For Unit 3B, she confirmed she'd personally delivered both the standard notice and the special envelope as instructed. I thanked her for her professionalism and settled in to wait. I'd imagined this moment for weeks. Edmund opening the official notice, his face paling as he registered the tripled amount, then the confusion as he opened the personal letter. I pictured him reading my carefully crafted words, the gradual dawning of realization that his mother-in-law, the extra mouth he couldn't afford to feed, now controlled the roof over his head. The personal letter had been simple but effective. Dear Barbara and Edmund, I hope this letter finds you well. You may be surprised by the rent increase notice you've received today. Allow me to explain. 3 months ago, you informed me that you could no longer afford to have another mouth to feed in your home, despite my offers to contribute financially. You gave me 2 weeks to find new accommodations after I had sold my home based on what I believed was a sincere offer of family support. Life works in interesting ways. While seeking new housing, I discovered an investment opportunity, the very building you call home. As the new owner of the property, I am exercising my right to adjust the rent to what I consider an appropriate market value for tenants of your particular character. Consider this a lesson in how we treat family, especially those we may one day depend upon ourselves. Regards, Margaret Wilson, owner, Sunrise Properties LLC. I had positioned myself in a coffee shop across from their building that afternoon, watching Jessica enter with her stack of notices. I couldn't see inside their apartment, of course, but imagining their reactions provided a certain grim satisfaction. The call came exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes later. My phone lit up with Barbara's name, and I felt a momentary flutter of nervousness before answering with a calm, "Hello, Barbara." "Mom." Her voice was high-pitched, almost unrecognizable with shock. "Is this some kind of joke? The letter?" "No, it's entirely genuine. I own your building now." "You can't do this," she nearly shrieked. "You've tripled our rent out of..." "What? Spite? Revenge? This isn't like you, Mom." "You're right," I replied evenly. "The mother you knew wouldn't have done this." But that was before her daughter stood silently by while she was called another mouth to feed, and discarded like unwanted furniture. I heard muffled sounds, then Edmund's voice came on the line, tight with barely controlled anger. "Margaret, This is completely unprofessional and potentially illegal. I've already called a lawyer. You can't target specific tenants with punitive rent increases. Actually, Edmund, I can. As your lawyer will tell you, there's no rent control in your district. As the property owner, I can charge whatever the market will bear. And if you choose not to bear it, you have 30 days to vacate, as per the terms of your lease. This is insane, he sputtered. We're having a baby. You're punishing your own grandchild. The irony of him suddenly acknowledging family ties wasn't lost on me. I'm simply making a business decision, Edmund. Isn't that what you did when you calculated the cost of keeping me in your home, and found it excessive? There was silence on the line. Then Barbara's voice again, now tearful. Mom, please. We can't afford this rent. Not with the baby coming. Not with Edmund's salary cut. We'll have to move, and there's nothing comparable in our price range in this neighborhood. Now you know what it feels like to be suddenly housing insecure, I replied, working to keep my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. The difference is, I'm giving you 30 days, not 14. Edmund came back on the line, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Margaret, look, I admit I handled things poorly. We both did. But surely we can work something out. You could even move back in with us if that would help resolve this. The audacity nearly took my breath away. Move back in? With people who see me as a financial burden? I wouldn't live with you for all the money in the world, Edmund. Barbara was crying now, audible even though she wasn't on speaker. Mom, Edmund was wrong. I was wrong. We never should have asked you to leave like that. I felt terrible every day since. Yet you never called, I pointed out. Not once in 3 months. I was ashamed, she admitted through tears, and afraid you'd never forgive me. Despite everything, I felt a pang in my heart. This was still my daughter, still the little girl I'd nursed through chicken pox and consoled through breakups. But she was also the woman who had chosen her husband's cruel economics over her mother's well-being. I'm not doing this out of hatred, Barbara, I said, softening my tone slightly. I'm doing it because actions have consequences, and both of you need to understand that how you treat family matters. What do you want from us? Edmund asked, desperation replacing his earlier arrogance. I want you to feel what I felt. Vulnerable, unwanted, discarded. I want you to understand that people aren't disposable when they become inconvenient. After a long pause, Barbara spoke again. Can we meet? Please. To talk about this in person. I considered refusing but decided a face-to-face conversation might provide the closure I needed. Fine. Tomorrow at the Riverstone Cafe at 10. Just the 3 of us. The next 24 hours passed in a strange limbo. Part of me felt powerful, vindicated. I had turned the tables so completely that they were now essentially begging for my mercy. Another part felt hollow, wondering if revenge, however justified, would fill the void their betrayal had created. Diane offered to come with me to the meeting, but I declined. This is something I need to handle alone. Just remember, she said as I left, you hold all the cards now. Don't let them manipulate you with guilt or family obligation. Those were the very things they discarded when it suited them. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, selecting a table in the corner that offered privacy without isolation. Barbara and Edmund arrived exactly at 10, both looking like they hadn't slept. Barbara's eyes were puffy from crying, and Edmund's usual confident posture was noticeably diminished. Thank you for meeting us, Barbara said as they sat down. Edmund nodded, uncharacteristically silent. I said nothing, waiting for them to continue. Mom, we were wrong, Barbara began, tears welling in her eyes again. What we did was cruel and thoughtless. I've been sick about it ever since, but I was too ashamed to call. And you? I asked, looking directly at Edmund. He swallowed hard. I was unnecessarily harsh. The financial pressure got to me, but that's no excuse for how I treated you. I should have found another solution. Like accepting my offers to contribute financially? I suggested. The offers you repeatedly rejected out of pride? He flushed, looking down at his hands. Yes. That was foolish. So what exactly are you proposing now? I asked, keeping my tone businesslike. They exchanged glances before Barbara spoke. We're asking if you would consider a more reasonable rent increase. Something we can actually afford. And if I don't? We'll have to move, Edmund admitted. Probably out of the city to afford something with enough space for the baby. Barbara would have a longer commute. We'd lose our deposit on preschool waiting lists. I let his words hang in the air, savoring the irony of Edmund now explaining financial hardship to me. I see, I finally said. And what have you learned from this experience? The question seemed to catch them off guard. They clearly expected immediate negotiation about dollar amounts. That family is more important than money, Barbara offered tentatively. That treating people as financial burdens rather than human beings is wrong, Edmund added, sounding like he was reciting lines he'd rehearsed. I studied them both, searching for genuine remorse versus mere desperation to escape the consequences of their actions. Barbara's distress seemed sincere. She'd always been terrible at hiding her emotions. Edmund was harder to read, but the humiliation of having to beg his mother-in-law for affordable housing had clearly pierced his pride. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, I said finally. I need to think about it. Mom, please, Barbara pleaded. We're truly sorry. Sorry because you regret your actions, or sorry because they've now affected you directly? I asked. Neither had an immediate answer. That's what I thought, I said, gathering my purse. I'll be in touch within the week with my decision. As I walked away, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The revenge had been sweet in conception and execution, but the aftertaste was more bitter than I'd anticipated. Was I becoming as calculating and cold as Edmund had been to me? Was perpetuating the cycle of hurt really what I wanted? These questions occupied my thoughts as I returned to Diane's apartment. She was eager for details, which I provided mechanically while my mind continued processing the deeper implications of my choices. So what are you going to do? She asked after I'd recounted the meeting. I looked out her window at the city skyline, considering the power I now held and how best to use it. I'm going to be better than they were, I said finally, but not without ensuring they've truly learned their lesson. After 3 days of careful consideration, I invited Barbara and Edmund to meet me at my newly rented office space. A small but professional suite I'd leased with some of my investment returns. I wanted neutral territory that still established my position of authority. They arrived looking anxious, Barbara's pregnancy now just barely showing in the slight curve of her abdomen. Seeing that physical evidence of my future grandchild softened something in me, though not enough to abandon the lesson they still needed to learn. Thank you for coming, I began, gesturing for them to sit across from my desk. I've made my decision regarding your rent situation. They both leaned forward slightly, tension visible in their postures. I'm not going to triple your rent, I stated plainly, watching relief flood their expressions. However, there will be conditions to my leniency. Of course, Edmund said quickly. Whatever you think is fair. First, there will be a rent increase 15%. Which is substantial but manageable on your income if you budget carefully. They nodded in unison. Second, we will attend family counseling sessions together. All 3 of us. I found a therapist who specializes in family dynamics and intergenerational conflicts. This condition clearly surprised them. Edmund looked ready to object but seemed to think better of it after a glance at Barbara. And third, I continued, you will both acknowledge in writing that your treatment of me was unacceptable, and commit to a specific set of behaviors and boundaries for our relationship going forward. Like a contract? Barbara asked hesitantly. Like an agreement between adults who respect each other. I clarified. Something we can all reference if tensions arise again. Edmund shifted uncomfortably. Is all that really necessary? Can't we just agree to put this behind us and move forward? No, Edmund, we can't, I said firmly. Moving forward requires addressing why this happened in the first place. Ignoring it virtually guarantees a repeat performance, perhaps when I'm older and even more vulnerable. After some discussion, they agreed to all conditions, Edmund more reluctantly than Barbara. I had my lawyer draw up the paperwork for both the new lease terms and our family agreement, which we all signed the following week. Our first counseling session was predictably awkward. Dr. Winters, a compassionate but no-nonsense therapist in her 50s, guided us through an initial assessment of the situation. Edmund was defensive, Barbara tearful. and I worked to remain composed while being honest about the hurt I'd experienced. What we have here, Dr. Winters observed toward the end of the session, is a fundamental breakdown of trust and a clash of expectations. Rebuilding will take time and genuine effort from everyone. Meanwhile, I used some of the proceeds from my investment to secure my own living situation. With Thomas's help, I found a lovely one-bedroom condominium in a building actually owned by another investment group I decided to join. The irony of becoming both a tenant and landlord wasn't lost on me. Furnishing my new home brought unexpected joy. Choosing pieces that reflected my taste alone, arranging them exactly as I pleased. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt truly independent, beholden to no one's judgment or approval. Barbara and I began rebuilding our relationship slowly, starting with weekly lunches without Edmund present. Initially, our conversations were stilted, the weight of recent events making casual interaction nearly impossible. But gradually, small glimpses of our former closeness emerged. A shared laugh over a waitress's outlandish hairstyle, her excitement when the baby kicked and she could share it with me. 5 months after our counseling began, Barbara went into labor 3 weeks early. Despite everything, she called me immediately after Edmund, and I was there in the hospital when my grandson William Robert came into the world, tiny and perfect with Barbara's eyes and Edmund's chin. Holding him for the first time, I felt the hard shell around my heart crack slightly. This innocent child knew nothing of our conflicts, our hurts, our pride. He represented possibility, the possibility that cycles could be broken, that new beginnings weren't just cliches but realities waiting to be embraced. Edmund, surprisingly, seemed transformed by fatherhood. The arrogant, controlling man who had dismissed me as a financial burden melted into someone almost unrecognizable when he held his son. Our interactions remained somewhat formal, but the open hostility had dissipated, replaced by a wary civility born of our shared love for Barbara and William. By Thanksgiving, almost a year after my unceremonious eviction, we gathered for dinner at their apartment. The tension was palpable but manageable, a vast improvement over the Cold War that had preceded my departure. By Christmas, we could exchange gifts with genuine if cautious warmth. Throughout this period, I continued building my unexpected second career in real estate investment. The building that had been my revenge purchase turned out to be just the beginning. With Thomas's guidance and my own financial acumen, I acquired 2 more small properties, creating a modest but growing portfolio that provided both income and purpose. Diane, impressed by my success and harboring her own entrepreneurial dreams, proposed a partnership. Together, we formed Wilson Palmer Investments, focusing on properties that could be improved and maintained without displacing existing tenants through excessive rent hikes, an ethical approach to a business often lacking conscience. As for Barbara and Edmund, they eventually purchased a small house in a family-friendly suburb, using the money they'd saved through my relatively merciful rent increase. I helped with the down payment. Not as a gift but as a formal loan with reasonable terms, maintaining the boundary between generosity and exploitation that I'd come to value. For William's first birthday, I established a trust fund with specific conditions. He could access portions at different life stages, but only after demonstrating financial responsibility and ethical understanding of wealth management. I wanted him to grow up valuing both money and people, never seeing them as mutually exclusive considerations. My circle of friends expanded beyond just Diane to include fellow investors, community members, and even some of my tenants with whom I developed respectful relationships. At 68, I found myself more socially engaged and professionally fulfilled than I'd been in years. The greatest gift from this painful chapter, though, was discovering that being underestimated could be leveraged as an advantage. Edmund had seen only an aging mother-in-law, a financial liability, another mouth to feed. He never considered the decades of financial expertise, the quiet resilience, or the capacity for strategic thinking that his dismissal would awaken. I learned that forgiveness becomes possible not when hurt is forgotten, but when accountability has been established and genuine change has begun. I haven't fully forgiven Barbara and Edmund, perhaps I never will completely, but I've found peace in the new equilibrium of our relationship, one built on clearer expectations and mutual respect, rather than assumed obligation. If you're watching this and facing your own family betrayal, remember, Your value isn't determined by others' willingness to recognize it. Sometimes the people who underestimate you provide the perfect opportunity to remind yourself and them of your true capabilities. Have you ever been underestimated and turned it to your advantage? Or found yourself rebuilding a relationship after betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of financial revenge and family reconciliation resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. I've got plenty more stories about finding strength in unexpected places and turning life's cruelest moments into opportunities for growth. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story on your own terms.